guys, welcome back to The Whipping Boy. We're going to do chapters 9 and 10 today. So we left off with Cutwater and Hold Your Nose Billy holding Jemmy, the whipping boy, and Prince Brat, whose real name is Prince Horace, for ransom. Except Cutwater and Hold Your Nose Billy think that Jemmy, the whipping boy, is really the prince, and that the prince is the whipping boy. They're all mixed up. And that goes back to chapter 2, when we found out that the prince can't read or write, but the whipping boy can. And that's very unusual for a prince to not be able to read or write. So they're assuming that Jemmy is really the prince. And I think Jemmy might be doing this to protect the prince. Remember, Jemmy has more street smarts than the prince, and he would do better, I think, than the prince under these kinds of circumstances. So let's see what happens in chapters 9 and 10. Chapter 9, revealing Jemmy's plan to trick the villains. Hold Your Nose Billy popped a clove of garlic into his mouth, ground it between his yellow teeth, and helped himself to a veal pie. Nothing like garlic to clear the head and fend off the plague. Cutwater, give the lads a ration of breakfast. The scrawny outlaw sliced off 2 thick pieces of coarse bread. He draped a salt herring across each slice. Eat hearty, little fellers. This smelly stuff, Prince Brat glared at the bread and herring. It's not fit for flies. Why, we eat regular worms and all, said Cutwater, picking the bones off the pheasant. I'll starve first. Suit yourself, Cutwater snickered. This is the first time we've feasted off the king's own table, and there's hardly enough for me and Billy. Jemmy sat on the bed straw beside the prince and contemplated his breakfast. He examined the bread closely, hunting for varmints. The prince, he knew, had never been starved enough to pick out wildlife from his grub. Eat, he whispered. I can't find any crawly things in it. The bread's stale, grumbled the prince. Stale enough to patch a roof, but I've scoffed down worse. The prince began to nibble around the edges. Hold Your Nose Billy glanced over and grinned. Take a chaw of garlic, whipping boy. It'll improve the taste considerable. Cutwater wiped his thin, greasy lips with the back of his hand. Billy, how do we know the prince ain't laid a trap for us in that message? He could have said one thing and wrote another. Where will we find someone to read it off for us? Jemmy lifted his chin to a regal height. You doubt the word and honor of your prince? You insolent oafs, curs, I'll have you horsewhipped. Cutwater yanked Jemmy to his feet. Who you calling them names? I'll flog your hide pink as a salmon. Hold Your Nose Billy pushed him aside. Keep your wits. It's worse than common murder to lay hands on a prince. No need to break any more of the king's laws than we have to. If it comes to a flogging, there's his whipping boy. The prince's eyes widened, and his face blanched white. The prospect of taking a whipping himself had never occurred to him. But, sir, it wasn't me who called you names. Cutwater gave a sudden cackle. Sir, is it now? That's more like it. But tell the prince here to keep a civil tongue in his head. Prince Brat shot Jemmy a poisonous look. The garlicky outlaw was leaning closer to Jemmy. See here, Prince. It's not that we doubt your word and honesty, not a bit. But all the same, let's hear you read off the message. Jemmy turned away from the man's breath and began to read. No, lad. Let's have it from bottom to top. Read it backwards. I do hope for your whipping boy's sake you don't stumble and trip as if the real words ain't on paper. Jemmy shrugged. It says, son, obedient, your obedient son, said Hold Your Nose Billy. Keep at it. Jewels and gold of cart full, a of ransom, a demand they. They demand a ransom of a cart, a full. The outlaw himself began to stumble and trip over the words. Aye, that's the ticket. Jemmy read the message through backward, and then a second time before the hairy outlaw was satisfied. Now then, he said, all we gotta do is get the message to the king without getting nabbed in the act. Simple, declared Jemmy. Send it to the castle in the hands of my whipping boy. Chapter 10, in which Prince Brat lives up to his name. Hold Your Nose Billy clapped a leery eye on the rat catcher's son. Prince, do you take me for a precious fool? Send your whipping boy to blab out where we're hid? The king will come chopping down every tree if he finds out we're nested in the forest. Jemmy assumed a princely air of indifference. Then tote the message yourself. It's no skin off my ear if you never get back alive. He filled his mouth with bread and herring. I declare this is tasty. Prince Brat scoffed under his breath. He hadn't shown a moment's interest in Jemmy's scheme to free him. Their eyes met and clashed. Gah, Jemmy thought. He's fuming like a stovepipe at being unprinced. He'll have me charged with treason. I'll stand guard over the prince, said Cutwater. You're the one to go, Billy. Me? Hooted the big man. Me that they sing songs about and pinch their noses? At the first whiff of garlic, it would be off with the head of Hold Your Nose Billy. Unlikely, corrected Jemmy. True, Papa would have you tortured a mite to loosen your tongue, but he wouldn't have your head, not Papa. He favors slow boiling in oil. The effect on the outlaws was instant. Hold Your Nose Billy's jaw dropped. Sweat broke out across his face like raindrops. Cutwater, you're skin and bones. You could slip in and out of a keyhole. I'll guard the prince. Faugh, Billy. I don't fancy being boiled to a crisp. The hairy outlaw gave a loud and decisive snort. Who'll send the whipping boy? Jemmy held back a sigh of relief. And my crown with him. Your golden crown? Blurted out Cutwater. Not by half we won't. Jemmy made the pretense of blazing up with impatience. Simpleton! I swear there are not two more ignorant, cloven-footed blockheads in the land. Prince Brat shot Jemmy a quick, thunder-scowl look. Stop it, he whispered harshly. Don't give them the rough side of your tongue. You'll get me whipped. Jemmy ignored him. Donkeys, he continued. Before the day is out, dozens of villains will deliver up false claims. Only my crown will convince Papa that you are the genuine villain. Hold Your Nose Billy began to pace, munching garlic cloves as if they were grapes. Finally, he tipped the crown off his head and flung it to Prince Brat. Whipping boy, deliver it to the king. If he doesn't follow our instructions to the letter, the prince'll be done for, Cutwater snickered, drawing a knife-like finger across his throat. And blab all you want, added the other outlaw. We'll pack the prince off to a different hiding place. By its smelly tail, Prince Brat tossed aside the uneaten herring. Without showing the slightest concern for Jemmy's fate, he flicked a glance at the two outlaws. I'll deliver nothing, he exploded. I won't go back to the castle. And that's the end of chapter 10. I find it hilarious that the prince is terrified of being whipped, like the whipping boy was always whipped when Prince Brat acted up. Ha! Funny. All right. I'll see you tomorrow for the next 2 chapters.